Hello, my name is Marvin DeJear, Senior Vice President of Talent Development. On behalf of the Greater Des Moines Partnership, I would like to welcome you all to this exciting webinar. Talent is at the top of everyone's priority list right now. And the Greater Des Moines region has been one of the fastest growing areas in the Midwest over the past decade for foreign-born talent. With the recent arrival of Afghanistan refugees in Iowa, the partnership wanted to highlight best practices and programs that employers can participate in to help find the talent they're looking for within the wide range of foreign-born talent in the region. Our panelists today will share insights on how you can be successful in your endeavors and create a meaningful opportunity for foreign-born talent. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our moderator for today's event, Brownell, Polk County Supervisor.
Thanks so much, Marvin. Again, my name is Brownell. I'm one of the 5 county supervisors here in Polk County. The county is very committed to the refugee and immigrant issues here in Des Moines, not just because of the talent pipeline, but it's the right thing to do. We have a great heritage in Iowa of accepting immigrants and refugees. So this continues today. And as Marvin said, we're one of the fastest growing foreign-born populations in the United States. And we're very proud of that designation. I'd like, at this time, I'd like to introduce our panelists, introduce themselves actually, and say your name, title, and the organization you're representing. Right here to my left with Nick, and we have 2 people joining us by Zoom, and we'll be participating. We'll get them after Stephanie. Great.
Good morning. My name is Nick Wirtz, and I serve as the Director of Immigrant and Refugee Community Services for Lutheran Services Iowa, or LSI. And we provide services here in the central Iowa area as well as in Sioux City.
Hi, I'm Carrie Chufunk, and I am the Director of the Des Moines Field Office for the U.S. Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. And we provide resettlement services and supportive services to refugees and immigrants in central Iowa.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Morris, and I'm the Director of the Refugee Alliance of Central Iowa. And RASI is a collaborative of stakeholders who want to see Central Iowa being a welcoming place to refugees and immigrants.
And Kellen?
My name is Kellen Anker. I'm the Refugee Services Program Manager with Catholic Charities Des Moines. We also provide refugee resettlement services here in Central Des Moines and the greater Central Iowa area. And we are growing our kind of post-resettlement services as well to provide additional support to refugees after their service period.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to my colleagues, and thank you to the partnership for this opportunity to speak today. My name is Sućeska. I serve as the Bureau Chief and State Refugee Coordinator for the Iowa Bureau of Refugee Services. We are a statewide agency within the Department of Human Services, helping support refugees all across Iowa and to ensure all of our resettlement partners, ECBOs, nonprofits, and stakeholders have the resources they need to administer successful resettlement services for our new Iowans.
Thanks very much, everybody. These folks are doing all the heavy lifting and all the good work around here. And I've learned to respect them and also become friends with some of them. So this will be a great panel discussion, I think. I'd like to ask the panelists to kind of keep their answers to, well, I'm not going to give you a time limit, but let's say keep it concise because we have 12 questions here to ask you. And we'll need to wrap it up sometimes. So think more Gettysburg Address than the second inaugural. All right. Moving on here, and we'll start with you, Mock. People probably want to know this. What's the process for refugees coming to Greater Des Moines region? What's the process for them coming here and getting settled in?
Yeah, it's a great question to start off the discussion on. Refugee resettlement is a very complex process, not only complex, but very comprehensive. What we've seen most recently with the Afghan evacuation and resettlement of those refugees looks a little bit differently than the traditional process of refugee resettlement to the United States and subsequently one of the states within this country. So when we're talking about Iowa and how resettlement of refugees works here, it's a process that really starts overseas. If I were to sum it, within the limited time that we're given, and refugee needs to cross an international border, claim asylum in a second country of safe haven, apply for refugee status, be approved for refugee status through the UNHCR High Commission for Refugees. And then eventually, once all processes are completed for resettlement, families or an individual gets travel notification to arrive to Iowa. That's where then the local resettlement agencies that are represented on this webinar today work to get all of the resources and capacities developed to ensure successful resettlement. So it's a process that takes a long time, anywhere from 12 to 16 months for up to 5 to 10 years, depending on the resettlement program, where folks are coming from, and what kinds of infrastructures are in place overseas to ensure a speedy and streamlined resettlement process. So it's, like I mentioned, it's complex and there are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of stakeholders that are involved to ensure successful resettlement. And then once families do arrive, it's a process that also takes some time. It's a limited amount of time with respect to initial resettlement services. But when we talk about long-term sustainable resettlement and integration, there are many partners, including those on the call today, that provide those services. So that's sort of how resettlement works and how people arrive here in a nutshell.
Mark, would it be fair to say, with respect to the Afghan refugees, that the majority of them end up in the Des Moines metro?
With the refugees from Afghanistan that we've resettled since August 1st, yes, the majority have been resettled to the Greater Des Moines area and resettled by the 3 resettlement agencies represented on the call today. And the second greatest population that's been resettled to the state has been in Cedar Rapids. And those refugees have been resettled by an agency, local agency, Catherine McCauley Center.
All right, thanks. That was a bonus question there. Bonus question for Mark. We'll move on to the second question here, unless you guys want to add anything to that. I think you covered that well. Thank you, Mark. What are the best ways for employers to connect with your agencies for employment opportunities? Nick, let's start with you.
Okay. Yeah, and I think I'll just to kind of tag on to what Mark shared. The U.S. refugee resettlement process is really focused on helping individuals become self-sufficient as quickly as possible through employment. So where some nations take an approach of helping people to become fluent with that native language before they authorize a work permit, here in the United States, refugees enter the country and can work immediately and indefinitely. And so getting people employed, getting employable adults into the workforce is one of our key goals as resettlement organizations. So each of our organizations has staff and works with clients around job development, understanding what their employment background, employment history has been, what types of opportunities might be a good fit for them here. Oftentimes language is a huge determinant in terms of what types of opportunities people can move into. But our team then works with employers to kind of match people to opportunities that are here within the local communities and work with HR teams and local employers to kind of make those placements and follow up and make sure people are successful in the workforce.
That would apply to all refugees, not just Afghans, right?
Correct. Yep.
Carrie, anything to add to that?
Not really. It's very similar for the resettlement agencies. We all have our own internal programs for employment, and they all have very similar goals.
Kellen, how about you?
Yeah, no additions. What Carrie and Nick have said is exactly the same kind of that we do as well. I would say the best way to connect with us, and I'm sure Nick and Carrie might kind of follow this, is to just, you can contact me directly or you can contact our agencies directly. Usually I like to have a conversation, or we have a couple of staff that work specifically in employment with the individual employers, talk about their opportunities, talk about their needs, and then that helps us make better, more succinct connections with specific clients because we've gotten to know them and got to know their needs. So contact us. All of our information is on our websites, and that's kind of a great place to start.
Okay, thanks. Are there some best practices or insights that you've found of potential employers looking for Afghanistan refugees or refugees from other countries for that matter? Mark, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the best practice is really to make that connection with a local agency to start fostering and building out that relationship between the employer and the refugee leading agency. The way to do that, as Kellen mentioned, is really to directly contact the organization or to find ways to get a hold of other refugee leading agencies through the Refugee Alliance of Central Iowa and some local networks and coalitions that we have here within Central Iowa. When we build those relationships and foster them really for that sustainable partnership, all 3 of our agencies are ensuring that our refugees are going into a safe place, going into a place where there's a livable wage and where there are supports for these refugees once they make this new employer their permanent place of employment. A lot of times it may be temporary and refugees move on to other career opportunities, but most of the time we find ourselves working with our employers long-term, and there is a streamlined sort of pipeline of refugees as they arrive to these places of employment because of those relationships that we've built with those employers, HR departments, providing technical assistance, and just in having the employers involved in the overall refugee network and the work that we do. On the flip side, we really try to ensure that the place where people are going is a place where they will thrive and where they will grow within that employment environment. So best practices really is to make sure that there are clear lines of communication between HR departments and our agencies. If there are educational opportunities our network can provide to these employers to help bring them on, we are here to do that. And last but not least, we really try to ensure that the relationships that we do build are sustainable. It's not just a one-off type of partnership. We have generations of refugees that have been working with our current employers, and refugees that are working in more of non-traditional environments as well, as we've seen, or essentially with a call to action by the greater community from the influx of Afghan refugees that have arrived and all refugees that will continue to arrive. We've seen a lot of people who have been interested in supporting. So it's just making sure communication is viable and clear. We have transparent means of working together. And if there's any support that employers may need, they can always reach out to the agencies for technical assistance.
A few other just kind of best practices I'll throw out there. Just given that when people arrive, they don't have a vehicle, so transportation to work is key. And so, employers who have helped troubleshoot that, if they're not on a bus line, a bus line is great, but we've had employers who've worked with DART, other entities to try to figure out how to make their place of employment more accessible to job seekers that need to use public transportation. We've also seen some employers, who've, maybe brought on an interpreter or, hired people in groups and designated a lead person who has language skills to try and bridge some of the language barriers. And then, we've also had employers who have, taken the initiative from a retention and development standpoint to bring on-site ESL classes or help their employees with immigration fees or applying for citizenship, recognizing that those are kind of important next steps in establishing some stability in the community. So those are just, I think, some best practices or highlights we've seen from some employment partners.
Stephanie, what are you seeing?
Yeah, I think when it comes to kind of think outside of the box thinking, working with cultures and communities that you maybe haven't yet before, I think that there are some really great, successful best practices that have been laid out for decades here in Des Moines. I think that we have a lot of employers, whether it be very big, hundreds or even thousands of employees, big companies, or even small manufacturing companies who have 15, 20 employees that have had the same employees for decades because, just because of them being able to offer a safe and comfortable environment for individuals to be able to work in. So group employment, being able to offer those transportation services, being able to have somebody on site that can offer interpretation translation services. These are all things that have been in place in various employers in the Central Iowa community for a long time and have been incredibly successful because of their willingness to do these kind of, just small adjustments or changes. The ELL classes as well, all arrivals, have to be in ELL English classes after they arrive. So being able to offer that on site, if someone has to leave in the morning, take the bus, go to class, come home, then be able to take the bus and get to work. Being able to offer those classes on site can oftentimes save somebody 4+ hours, in their day. So, our resettlement agencies, all three, have a ton of experience in this work. And so even just reaching out to them for what are some of those ideas, what are some of those best practices, there's a lot of experience here in the Des Moines area in hiring refugees and hiring people that don't speak English. And they've got really good ideas that I know are always happy to share.
And some of the changes that came with individuals coming from Afghanistan, just because of cultural and religious considerations around where they could go in the workforce and the kinds of jobs that they would be able to hold culturally and religiously. We were able to work with new employers to think through how to get around some of the barriers. And it included talking with employers that had worked with individuals that didn't speak English as their primary language, but hadn't ever worked with refugees in the past, to think about okay, so you have your instruction guides in English and in Spanish. So what about a pictorial instruction guide? What about having a Pashto one? What about if you want to work with refugees in the future, having Swahili? And so really helping them think outside of these are who have always worked here. How do we adapt those ways that we've always done business to then be able to open up our doors to a larger portion of the potential future workforce? And we're happy to do those things and just, kind of problem solve and think through not just what's happening today and tomorrow, but what might happen in 6 months or 6 years.
Thanks so much, Kellen. Anything to add there?
I don't have anything to add to that. I mean, I certainly agree with everything that was stated. I do see that there was a question in the chat. I don't know if we're answering questions now or at the end, but I think it's a good point. So I'd like to touch on it. The question was, is housing considered as a refugee is placed in a job and with an employer? And if so, what's our experience been? So I think, and I can speak for Catholic Charities, housing is something that we consider when we are looking at talking with employers, but sometimes things happen faster or slower, both in housing and in employment. So, and with the kind of limited availability of housing that we have for refugee clients, sometimes we can't always make an accommodation in having a client very close to where they're living, but it is certainly something that we would take into consideration if needed. And it's also something I know there's been discussions about, how can we expand, we're here kind of in Des Moines, how do we get to some of those suburbs and provide housing and employment in those areas too. So it's definitely something we talk about.
All right, let's move along here to
Bob. Can I just chime in real quick? Just a quick point. To touch on what Kellen has shared and pertaining to the question specifically, we've had a multitude of employers that have reached out to us across the state wanting to hire Afghan refugees. A lot of the employers that have reached out to us are located within vicinities that are not conducive to overall successful resettlement for refugees. For example, for some time, we've been working with Pella Corporation out of Pella, Iowa, to see how we can get refugees from Des Moines to Pella. Pella has housing, Pella has resources, but they don't have a resettlement infrastructure to be able to successfully administer resettlement for newly arrived refugees and families. So when we are looking at pairing housing with employment, it would be great if housing was directly next to an employer or at least close to the employer. But housing also needs to be relatively close to the resettlement agency or service providers. So it's not just from an employment lens. We also have to ensure that the social services and social networks are in place to be able to successfare administer resettlement, which includes securing employment. It's all integrated. It's like a spider web. It's not tiered. There are a lot of moving pieces and it's all kind of connected.
Thanks. And since you touched on that, Kellen, we'll start with you on this one. Does a company need to do things special to hire refugees? And you had Michael touched on that a little bit, but for example, any additional paperwork they have to do or considerations they have to make? What makes a successful company with refugees?
Yeah, to my knowledge, there's no additional paperwork that a company would need to do. Our refugees do come with some different documentation. They do come through with an employment authorization documentation card that is a legal identification for employment. They also have social security cards and then a form called an I-94, which just shows their entry into the United States through a port of entry. So all of those things are acceptable forms of identification for employment. So as long as the employer understands that, there should be no issue with any of the paperwork required on their end with their HR departments. And then again, I think it's just kind of the understanding of some of the things that we've touched on, access to transportation, English language classes, kind of all of the other things that come with hiring refugees and immigrants. Those are kind of things that will potentially impact a hire, but usually we don't find that it's a major challenge as long as employers are aware of those things.
Okay, Terry?
No, there's no special paperwork like Kellen said. And I think the biggest issue for employers to be aware of is during the refugees resettlement period, that we are continuing to work with them around our requirements from the Office of Refugee Resettlement that includes specialized medical appointments, a number of other social service appointments. And so from the resettlement agency's perspective, we try and get as much of that out of the way before employment, but sometimes there may be things early on during the hiring process that we need to take care of so that their work is not interrupted. So we do have a lot of employers that reach out to us and say, we know that you're getting arrivals. How do we get them to work as quickly as possible? And the answer is we need, 30, 60 days just to get these things taken care of, make sure their health is addressed, make sure that their benefits are applied for, so that when they go to work, there's as little interruption as possible, that their kids are in school, that those basic needs are taken care of. And so some patience on the employer's end to make sure the family is as stable as possible and that the refugees are ready to enter the workforce.
Right. Nick or Stephanie?
Bob, I would like to add something,
Sure.
if possible. Although seemingly special, I think employers, it's simple, just need to be willing to hire refugees. When we look at some of the unemployment rates across the state with employers, when we pair that with the middle skills gap, when we talk about how do we tap into underserved and non-traditional workforces, refugees definitely meet that criteria. We have seen an influx of refugees that have arrived to the state with respect to Afghans. We will continue to see refugees arriving through the resettlement pipeline. Employers just need to maybe sometimes take a leap of faith and work with the refugee network and identify areas where there is a viable workforce. Refugees come with a strong work ethic, come with many skills from their home countries, or skills that they will learn here to be able to be successful, survive and thrive, not only for themselves, but for their families. So to Carrie's point, with the assistance that the refugee resettlement agencies provide, but the overall support that is within the refugee network, employers are a part of that. We've had employers historically that have been hiring refugees for many years. As mentioned earlier, we have new employers that have come on board and wanting to support refugees. So it's just a matter of making those connections. And it's really as simple as getting in touch with one of the agencies, identifying where the needs are within their employment environment, and then how do we pair the two? How do we pair the two going forward?
Well, Mike, let's say a few for a second here on the next question, because we have a business audience here, private sector business audience here, so they're probably wanting to know some numbers. How many people, refugees, have we taken on here so far? I mean, how many potential workers have we had come to Iowa, and more specifically Greater Des Moines, since the Afghan families have become arriving? And I guess what I'm wondering also is, do we have any metrics of how long it takes to get a refugee full-time employment? I'm thinking anecdotally, it seems like it's fairly quick. I'm thinking of the Bosnian and Serbians in the 1990s. They seem to assimilate very quickly, and others have too. But do we keep any metrics on that?
So it's a 3-part question. I'll try to go part by part, and then I'll defer to my colleagues to answer on some of the metrics. We also we track data here at the Bureau of Employment Rate, starting wages or average wages, and what sorts of benefits refugees do receive once they are placed in employment. So when for a condensed timeline, for the sake of the conversation, we'll talk August 1st of 21 to today of 22. We've seen a little over 1,000 refugees across the state be resettled to Iowa, including Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, Council Bluffs, and Sioux City. The bulk of those, majority, probably between 500 to 700, have been resettled to the Greater Des Moines area. The second largest destination has been Cedar Rapids. When we're talking about employment, it really runs the gamut on how quickly one can be employed. There are unique employment programs within the resettlement agencies that focuses on fairly employable adults within that case to get them into employment very quickly. Nick touched on that, on the purpose and structure of the U.S. resettlement program is to become economically self-sufficient and mobile within 90 to 180 days. There have been some extensions for the Afghan populations, but traditionally we're looking at 90 to 180 days of services, depending on program enrollment. When we are looking at and when we are working with a family or a case that does not have any medical or social barriers, all paperwork is completed up front. There are no issues with getting employment authorizations and social securities in a timely manner. Ideally, and I'll defer to my colleagues as well, probably within the 30 to 45 day range, people will be ready to work because there's medical appointments that need to be completed. We have to make sure social services up front, or at least the basics, are administered and completed. And then we have to ensure that all paperwork, legal documentation is in order to be able to begin work. I-94s is the state issued identification that every refugee arrives with. So they are legally authorized to work alongside their employment authorization that they receive. But sometimes employers look for social securities and we wait until those come through as well. If we are working at refugees who may have some more challenges, medical concerns, just need some extended wraparound services, a lot of the times they will not be enrolled into employment programs through the resettlement agencies. They will be enrolled through family investment programs or refugee cash assistance programs through the state. That's where the Bureau comes in and helps support to provide some extended services and also job development services for refugees and eligible ORR populations for up to 5 years. We were able to get some extension waivers to remove that timeline due to COVID, and those do expire in September, but I presume that we may be eligible to provide for some further extensions, but that's yet to come, and I'll share that with you once we cross that bridge. But it really depends on the refugee's background, what skill sets they come with, and maybe what challenges they also are coming with that will be dependent upon how quickly they can get employed. But rest assured that refugees, if we were to put a rate of employability on the refugee population, it's very quickly. That also is a testament to the employers themselves. They've identified internally where some flexibilities could be met to meet the challenges or unique circumstances of refugees, and really working with the resettlement organizations, the Bureau of Refugee Services, and even partnering with Iowa Workforce Development to some instance on how to get refugees employed very quickly. So that's sort of, again, in a nutshell, and I'd also defer to my colleagues to add anything they see fit.
How about you, Nick? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably I would say on average, at least with our Afghan arrivals, it's been about 2 months' time on average that we've seen most cases find employment within the community. So it's been very quick, and we've been very thankful that there have been so many opportunities at this time when our country has received such a large number of people who are coming in and need to find employment quickly. So, and as Mark said, a high motivation to work. Many people still have family members back in Afghanistan. Things are not great. They're not good there at all. And so are very eager to work and support family members that are back home, and hopefully be able to bring them here as well in the future. So, and I would just also add, because we are trying to help people become employed as quickly as possible, we're helping people find that first job to get their footing. I think longer term, the goal for us, for our larger community, is how do we help people find pathways into additional advancement, additional growth within the community. And so I think that's where other employers and partners, as Mark mentioned, can kind of come alongside and help support people beyond their initial job.
Gary?
Yeah, I would echo Nick very much on recent arrivals. We have a number of clients that have job offers long before they actually even have copies of their Social Security cards and work authorizations. For us, our employment program, our last 2 years, which have been most of the COVID pandemic, actually was reviewing statistics earlier this week. For both of the last 2 years, within 120 days, which is 4 months of arrival, over 75% had hit the self-sufficiency mark within the first 4 months. And 100% of our families that were enrolled in the program were considered self-sufficient at the 6-month mark. So they're definitely getting into employment and they're getting full-time jobs with benefits, health insurance, paid time off. Employers are very flexible and supportive and definitely offering those things. So I think, employers here in the Des Moines area are very much willing to work with us and are supportive of our refugee families that are here. I think numbers, are going to look a little bit different for our Afghan families just because of some of the delays in paperwork that we've seen. And I know that's been frustrating both for Afghan folks and for the employers. And it's just because the way that the evacuations happened and the way that paperwork processing has happened. But I will say we are going to have a number of folks that are going to need help with degree transfers and those sorts of things. There are a large number of individuals that have come to Iowa that are skilled, that are educated, that once they have some work experience in the US and have transferred their degrees are going to need assistance, laddering up and moving up in the workforce, but are definitely going to have those things that employers are looking for.
Nonetheless, those are pretty impressive numbers. Stephanie, your perspective?
I think the only thing I would add on to this is, having that patience, with Afghanistan, with resettlement, a lot of our refugee community members that have come here from traditional reception and placement programming, spent 5, 10, 20 years in refugee camps waiting to come here. So when they come here, we know who they are, we know what their medical needs are, we know what their skills are. We can work, with identifying, a lot of those data pieces that we had in advance. We have social security cards and those paperwork applications that were already in place when we received 1,000 people in a few months without having that information far in advance like that. Our resettlement agencies, have moved mountains. And so just, having that patience, understanding that, I think, I don't want to speak for anyone, but I assume that all of our resettlement agencies, want to see these individuals employed as quickly as possible. That's a big part of that process, but just knowing that some of those things are really out of their hands. And, again, asking, how, kind of going out of your way to ask resettlement agencies, to ask the community partners within our network that have this experience, what they can do, what they can expect, just kind of seeking that information out. Because again, I think that, all of our resettlement agencies, our entire network is more than happy to work with employers and provide that information. Rossi has a lot of resources to share in terms of, how that paperwork works, how to find information about, documentation, how to, culturally responsive and, webinars or other information or resources that we could be sharing too about Afghans in particular, about other cultures or languages, which I can share later. But there's a lot of resources out here, and we're all very happy to help connect those dots.
Ellen?
I don't have much to add. I think my other co-panelists have done a great job at kind of giving everybody all the details. So it's great.
Very much. I can see right now we're not going to get all these questions, but that's all right. We'll keep going anyway. Mark, I'll start with you again on this one because you may hear this first. Are you anticipating an influx of Ukrainians?
No, not at this time. We are keeping close tabs on the events as they unfold with the humanitarian migration of Ukrainian refugees. We have weekly debriefings with our federal partners, which include international NGOs that are on the ground in Europe, working with local entities to help support Ukrainian refugees. As many of you have read or seen, and if not, I'll share with you that the Biden administration did release a statement on up to 100,000 Ukrainian refugees for fiscal year 22 into 23. It was a pretty broad statement. So we don't know what that specifically means and how quickly or even when Ukrainian refugees will arrive, let alone how many will come to Iowa. 100,000 is not a lot. So I don't want that number to scare anyone or deter anyone. if we were to look at the Afghan evacuation and how many people arrived to the United States, it was 70,000, with 1,000 of those with a little less than 1,000 of those coming to Iowa. So it's not going to be another larger influx of refugees if it comes to it. If anything, we will see more of a steady tiered approach to the resettlement of Ukrainians here in the United States. What I want to ensure is the understanding and framework we are working within now, as opposed to what we were with the Afghan evacuation. How the Afghan evacuation and resettlement was conducted was unprecedented. We could go back to the 70s without Southeast Asian refugees that arrived to Iowa. But even then, it was different due to our involvement within Afghanistan and the 20-year timeline we were there as a government and military. So when we evacuated Afghan refugees and brought them over to the United States on a handful of military bases, the refugee resettlement process that it's tiered and sort of incremental overseas happened at a very fast pace here domestically. To provide you sort of a context, I had a conversation with a colleague the other day that the amount of Afghan refugees that were resettled in the timeline that we saw now was equivalent to about a year or two of steady refugee resettlement. So the entire infrastructure was taxed, for lack of a better word. If we are to look at the Ukrainian refugee situation, it's going to be much, much slower paced, much more of a timeline for the infrastructures and capacities to be able to develop. And once it comes to it, of course, we will let our partners know and the community know what the next steps will be. But for right now, for Ukrainian refugees, it is a waiting game.
All right, let's move on. And Carrie, let's start with you on this one. What are some other needs you're seeing Afghan refugees need outside of employment and housing?
So Afghans that are arriving to Iowa, like a lot of refugees from around the world, came here with a handful of personal belongings, a couple of suitcases of clothing per family. Which is typical in refugee resettlement. And so for the resettlement agencies, our job is to find them housing and get them the basic furnishings for that housing. We're now trying to finish moving people out of temporary housing into their permanent homes. And most folks have already started jobs or are actively looking for jobs and just waiting on that permanent housing. So some of the needs that our clients are having right now is help actually physically getting into the housing. We've found a whole bunch of apartments that are coming open in the next 2 weeks, but how do we get them into those apartments? How do we get the furniture into those apartments so that they can get settled in there? The kids can get, used to getting on the bus and going to school. Mom and dad can get into their daily lives. So that's a big need. The other thing is, refugees are human beings like you and me. They want to make friends. They want to learn the community, and they want to have dignity and treatment. So, helping people become used to the community and treating them like your neighbors and your friends can go a long way for helping any refugee feel welcome and supported in the community. And so, one thing to know about, especially Afghans that were evacuated, is they very much want to be in the United States. They very much miss back home and miss their families, but they want to be here. They feel very strongly about service that the U.S. government did for them and their families, and so they want to integrate into society. So something that people can do that is just very much going to help meet some of those social needs that we all have is just treating people like people and saying hello and being kind and just getting to treat them like your neighbors when you see them at the grocery store. So those are two kind of big areas of need that the families that we're working with are seeing. There was a lot of hoopla and fanfare when our first few arrivals came, and it's kind of died down, which is good because we don't, want them to feel like their lives are being invaded on, but we still are in need of assistance with getting them fully settled in.
You say need of assistance, you're talking about people to physically help move furniture into an apartment, right?
Yeah, so some of that is if you love moving couches, we have a job for you.
Kellen, that's your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think volunteering is definitely an excellent way to help, and all of our agencies have avenues in which people can do that. So that's great. I think some of the other needs our clients are seeing are having outside of kind of that housing and employment. And I think we've touched on this, is kind of the transportation aspect. A lot of them want to be self-sufficient. A lot of them have experience in driving, have driver's licenses in their home countries. But there's just a little bit of challenge of, studying for the test, taking the test, practicing driving in the United States and with our rules and all the different signs and everything. So, I know there are resources out there, and we would love to know how to connect our clients to those resources, because not all of us have the capacity to, teach 300 plus people how to drive a car. So if if somebody's got resources on what are some alternate ways for transportation, we work closely with DART. We work closely with a lot of other entities to help our clients with that. But that's a big one. We see clients just want to get themselves to where they need to go, and they're willing to do it. And so any support we can give them to do that would be great. And then I also think, and again, there's a lot of conversations being had about this, lots of different changing parts constantly happening. But our clients are going to need a lot of support when it comes time to apply for asylum, green cards, any of their immigration paperwork. Like Mock mentioned, we had just about 1,000 people come to Iowa in the last 6 months, and all of those people are going to need immigration support at the same time. So any support that can be offered, or ideas or thoughts or connections, any of that networking is going to be a huge need here coming up in the summer and early fall. So those are kind of two additional things I would say on top of what Carrie mentioned.
Nick?
Yeah, I think those are all great things Carrie and Kellen mentioned. I would just add on to the legal services, for a large portion of the Afghan arrivals that came, they entered through a process called humanitarian parole. So they don't have refugee status. Many of them have parolee status. And so that's what's requiring the application for asylum. So there is before Congress an Afghan Adjustment Act, which many of us have been advocating for to really help expedite the process for all of these new members of our community, to help them really have more stability, more permanency in terms of their immigration status. So, if your employers are in a position to advocate for that, that would certainly be a tremendous help for all the people we've helped welcome here to Iowa. I don't want to skip over housing. I know you said besides housing, but housing, I think has been just a huge challenge. And I think will continue to be a challenge. It's a challenge for anybody in the community, not just this population. But, if we want to continue to have the capacity to invite people here, welcome people here to become a part of our community and a part of our workforce, we've got to figure out a way to have more affordable housing. And I know that's out of our control, but that's just been a big barrier, especially when we've received so many people so quickly. We have had to rely on, temporary short-term housing, which has really kind of complicated the timeline for us to be able to provide services, to teach people how to ride the bus, getting kids enrolled in school. So, without permanent housing from the start, it really kind of slows the process down and just kind of makes it a clunky process. So that's the other huge, I think, big barrier. And so if there are people out there that know landlords that, are willing to rent, able to rent, work with our organizations that have properties on the bus line, you're always looking for new landlord partners to work with.
Yeah.
Stephanie?
I just wanted to share one more thing about the housing, especially larger housing units, 3 and 4 bedroom units. There are several larger families that I know several of us are looking for housing for.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I'll keep my answer short here, just because I do think that the resettlement agencies are very much the experts in that matter. But yeah, we put out in our newsletter every week requests if anyone has leads on 3-bedroom plus apartments. If you know anybody, please. All of us, I think, would be more than happy to connect on that. But and then in terms of those basic needs, I do want to share. Rossi, just in discussions kind of as time progressed, and identifying what were the biggest needs, what were things that we as a community could be doing to help support resettlement efforts, one of the things that we created was a centralized donation facility. So Kraus Plus was really kind in working with us and securing a warehouse downtown. We have donation hours every Tuesday, Thursday morning. All 3 resettlement agencies have staff that come in and take what they need. Polk County was very kind in donating 300 beds, which when refugees come, they have a really limited budget. Resettlement agencies obviously have limited budgets, so that helps save thousands of dollars, which was it made a really big impact. We've had donations from Start Small with diapers, Save the Girls with needs for females and feminine hygiene. There's a lot of partners. There's a lot of pieces in this kind of very big puzzle that have to happen collaboratively and together in order to really make this resettlement, in general, in order to make resettlement happen, really to the best of our collective ability. So, our community, I think, has traditionally worked together very well. That's not always the case. And I think that, it's a huge credit to the community at large and all of our collective efforts together and making, Iowa such a long-term historic leader in refugee resettlement.
As Kellen mentioned, we had 1,000 refugees from Afghanistan come here and not to Iowa. That doesn't even count the other refugees that come here from Burma, the Middle East, Africa, and other places. So that's on top of it, of the 1,000 Afghans that came. And then on top of that, we have secondary immigration of thousands that come here, and that's rarely even tracked. This will be the last question, and then we're going to get to some chat questions if we might. What resources do we have to help children who may not know English that well, or how they transition to school? Next review.
Yeah, I think one of the key resources I can think of is through RASI, through our Refugee Alliance of Central Iowa. We have an education work group, which really pulls together staff from a lot of the metro schools to kind of strategize around how can we better help support families and children as they're getting into school. So that's a great opportunity for people to get plugged in and figure that out. Obviously, it looks different school district to school district, how they staff and prepare for that and how they structure their classrooms. But that's been a great kind of think tank for strategies.
Yeah, and definitely RASI is a great resource for professionals that are working with English language learner students. And then for a lot of the children that we work with are enrolled in Des Moines School District, which has a fairly comprehensive program for English language learner students. And then ethnic community-based organizations, or ECBOs, you might hear us refer to, have been started by a variety of former refugees that are living in our community. And so you'll see organizations like Genesis Youth Services and Shalom Community Impact Center that have after-school programs, sports programs, youth mentoring programs. And they really have, with open arms, welcomed the Afghan community and have provided their resources to arrivals as they've come. And really that mentoring and support for English language learner youth has been so great to provide those additional supports to refugee families as their kids start to adjust to life in the U.S. is invaluable. Just because you don't look alike doesn't mean you don't understand what each other's going through.
Kellen, from Catholic Charities' perspective of children.
Again, I think Nick and Carrie have touched on, all of the great resources, all the wonderful things. We do have ongoing partnerships with a lot of the school districts, and I know they have a lot of internal efforts to make sure kiddos are getting, English language, resources, English language. I'm drawing a blank on the word I'm looking for, but the schools are providing supports for those children in the schools at all different levels. So in addition to what Nick and Carrie said, I think, we usually find our kiddos are the ones who learn English fastest, and then they love to start chattering us up every time we see them. So it's a great, fun way to get to know the families more.
I would just add too, just for school districts, for other community service providers, there's a national technical assistance provider for all refugee serving organizations, but also local community organizations, just to understand the cultural nuances of different arriving populations. things like school enrollment. It's called Switchboard. So the website is switchboardta.org. But so they've been kind of a clearinghouse of resources. We always encourage people to go and check that out. And then for employers, there's the Tent Foundation. It's tent.org. They've developed some guides on hiring Afghans and other refugee populations. So that's another great resource for employers to check out. They kind of will walk you through just kind of some of the broad steps or considerations. And again, us locally would be glad to connect with people to talk through that in greater detail.
Thanks, Nick. That's great.
Hey, Bob, can I have one more thing?
Sure.
Just kind of to add on to what Nick is saying, if anyone has questions, moving forward about how to connect with the TEN Foundation, the Switchboard Technical Assistance Providers, the Rossi Network puts out a newsletter every Thursday that has there's been a ton of resources, obviously, that have been developed around our Afghan arrivals, but also other communities as well. Anytime that there are new resources that are particularly relevant to what's going on, whatever our current time is, we put that out every Thursday morning. We also have a website that we maintain a lot of information at. So, moving forward, if anyone has questions about, whether it be education or whether it be employment related or advertising jobs, we have a lot of employers that will reach out and ask to have different positions advertised to our network. So, that goes out every Thursday. We're always happy to post resources or to help connect those dots. And there's a lot of great content on there about how to work with Afghan communities, how to understand their culture background better, how to, access and utilize, existing skill sets and apply that to future jobs and, the paperwork and just everything in between. So there's a lot of resources out there. We're always happy to connect.
Thanks so much.
Can I have one more quick
Yeah,
thing?
absolutely.
And then for families that are expecting, we work closely with Every Step. They work with refugee and immigrant families that are expecting babies or have new arrivals. They are a wealth of knowledge and resources for those families, as well as Head Start and Early Head Start for the younger kiddos. There's a lot of want to make sure that there are supports in place to kind of make sure kids are on track even before they end up in the school system.
All right, thanks so much. As a politician, I said we're going to go to chat for some questions. Well, we're not. So I said something and meant something else. But anyway, so at this point, this has been a great conversation here today. I really appreciate the panelists. Let's kind of move on to final comments, if you would, and we'll wrap this up. Mark, let's start with you.
Final comments. I think when we talk about refugee work and the refugees themselves, for us to lead with a sense of humanity. And I think remembering that refugees are coming from circumstances and dire situations that are affecting their livelihood and well-being to be able to live in their home. I think it's fair to say from personal experience as a refugee, and also working with the refugee community for many years, that refugees don't necessarily want to leave their homes. They have to. And so what are we doing to ensure that our new neighbors, our new friends, our new citizens are getting equitable, accessible, and equal treatment as any of us would expect or want if we had to flee our homes and go to somewhere, to a new land, to a new environment, to a new culture. So whatever we can do as a network, as a community, to ensure that all Iowans and all future Iowans have the supports and the resources they need to be successful and to thrive here goes a long way. So those are my final thoughts.
Thanks, Mark. Kellen?
Excuse me. I just wanted to say, thank you for inviting us and having us be a part of this conversation. I think it's really important to bring all the players together to have conversations about how we can best support our clients and how to make their transition to this new world that they live in the most successful it can be. So thank you for that. And I really look forward to continuing existing partnerships and building on new ones. So thanks.
We'll go from right to left. Nick?
All right. Yeah, no, thanks for the opportunity to be a part of this. I would just say, I've been filled with more hope, I think, than I ever have before, just in terms of our community's response to this effort. It's just been great to see, new people, new partners say, how can I help? It's just been really, really encouraging, employers included. And so I think the more that we can continue to collaborate, work together, the better we will be at welcoming not only Afghans, but other populations here to our community and continuing to help them thrive here in Central Iowa.
Great.
Iowa is a place that I call home, and I'm not from here, and I've come to be welcomed, and I love seeing our newest Iowan neighbors be welcomed wholeheartedly. And much like Nick, the outpouring of support and love from our neighbors to our new neighbors has been immensely uplifting. And I just hope that we continue down this track and that we continue to be a welcoming state.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I would just, finish by also, saying thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to making the choice to be here and to learning more about this process, about these communities, about these agencies that do all of this hard work day in and day out. We've had well over 40,000 people resettle to Central Iowa since the modern resettlement program began in the mid-70s. We have 148 languages plus represented, so that's 148 different ethnicities. As Marvin mentioned, or Dr. DeJear mentioned at the beginning of the program, we have one of the fastest growing refugee and immigrant communities across the nation. And I think that for all of us to be able to, to continue growing and prospering as a community, but also just, as a few people have mentioned too, this just being the right thing to do. So, we have so many people that have arrived and that will continue to arrive that make incredible employees that, for so many reasons, make our entire community better as a whole for us all. So again, our resettlement agencies the work that they do is incredible. They're always, I think, very welcoming and very happy to make connections with employers and community partners. So again, if you're interested in learning more, we have lots of resources. We're always happy to connect. And thank you very much for your interest, and we look forward to working together.
Thanks so much. The partnership and the county both thank panelists and all the work you're doing, the great work you're doing. Obviously, you can tell that they're doing some really great things here in the region. And this isn't just a Des Moines thing. I think anecdotally, I think you all know that you can see refugees and immigrants across the whole spectrum of the Des Moines metro. Thinking specifically of Clyde and Johnston, those have become huge hubs for refugees and immigrants, and not just them, but those within their school system. That's been noticeable. The change has been noticeable. So not just a Des Moines thing, and I echo everything that Nick and Carrie and Kellen and Stephanie and Mock have said, that it's great to see the community pour out their hearts like they have and welcome folks. There's just not any bad instances that I can think of have come out of this. So it's been great to see. The partnership will continue to share information with connect employers of the region and those seeking job opportunities to their website and more events like this. Thanks again to our panelists one more time. And if people were here, we'd be clapping for you right now, but they're not. So thanks for being here for this important topic, and those of us that joined by Zoom. Have a great day, and thanks.